In the Vatican archives, there is a diary entry that many in the Church would rather forget. On October 30th, 1501, the Pope's Master of Ceremonies wrote about a shocking night in the Apostolic Palace. He said about 50 prostitutes were brought in and stripped. He described candelabras set on the floor, chestnuts scattered across the room, and the women crawling on their hands and knees to pick them up while cardinals watched. Then he said it got worse. There was a sexual competition, and the Pope himself gave prizes to the men who could perform the most. This was not written by an enemy of the Church. It came from Johann Burchard, the Pope's own Master of Ceremonies, a man whose job was to record what happened at court. What he wrote that night has troubled the Catholic Church for over 500 years. And here is the most disturbing part. This was not even the worst thing this Pope did. The parties were only the start. This was a man who admitted to at least 9 children while he wore the papal crown. He lived openly with a 20-year-old mistress inside the Vatican. He let his son's enemies be killed, including his own son-in-law. He bought the papacy with money and favors, turning the throne of St. Peter into something many did not recognize. For more than a decade, from 1492 to 1503, one man bent the most famous office in Christianity to his own will. Many later said the Church has tried to make people forget his name. That man was Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, and what follows is not anti-Catholic propaganda. It comes from accounts close to the papal court, including church sources, ambassadors' reports, and Roman diaries. Let us step inside what many call the most corrupt papacy in history. Rodrigo Borgia did not begin as a monster. He was born in 1431 near Valencia in Spain. From a young age, he was guided toward a church career. His uncle, the powerful Cardinal Alfonso Borgia, became Pope Calixtus III in 1455. What was one of the first things this new Pope did? He made 25-year-old Rodrigo a cardinal. It was not because Rodrigo was known for holiness or deep learning. It was because they were family. By age 26, Rodrigo held one of the most powerful jobs in the Curia, Vice-Chancellor. That role made him the chief manager of papal business. Over the next 35 years, popes came and went. Rodrigo stayed. He gathered money, friends, and secrets. But he had a problem. He could not stay away from women. Writers of the time said he was very handsome and very charming. One person wrote that he drew women as iron is drawn to a magnet. Even as a young cardinal, his behavior raised alarm. In 1460, Pope Pius II sent him a harsh letter. Rodrigo had thrown a party in Siena where there were immodest dances and many women while husbands were kept outside. Pius told him he behaved like a vulgar young man, not like a church leader. He warned that such behavior gave people a reason to say that churchmen used their offices for orgies. Imagine that. A pope had to tell his own cardinal to stop hosting sex parties because it made the church look bad. Rodrigo did not stop, he just became more careful. In the 1470s, he entered a long relationship with Vanosa de Catane, an Italian noblewoman. He was not married. He was a cardinal and supposed to be celibate. But she had 4 children by him. Cesare, 1475, Juan, 1476, Lucrezia, 1480, and Geoffrey, 1481. Here is the shocking part. Rodrigo did not hide them. He accepted them as his own and even used papal documents to legitimize them. A cardinal with a public family was unusual, and many thought this alone should have kept him from the papacy. They were wrong. When Pope Innocent VIII died in July 1492, Rodrigo had something more powerful than virtue. He had money and deals to offer. He was ready to spend whatever it took to become Pope. The conclave of 1492 is remembered as one of the most corrupt in history. Rodrigo did not slip a few bribes under the table. He spent on a grand scale. He sent Cardinal Ascanius Sforza 4 mule loads of silver, not metaphorical mules. Real mules carrying silver through the streets to Sforza's palace. In return, Sforza backed him and became vice-chancellor with a large income. To the Orsini cardinals, Rodrigo promised land and castles. To Cardinal Pallavicini, he promised the fortress of Civita Castellana. It seemed every vote had a price, and Rodrigo was willing to pay it. Cardinal Giovanni de' Medici, the future Pope Leo X, saw what was happening. He said, "And now we are in the power of a wolf, the most greedy the world has ever seen. If we do not run, he will devour us all." It was too late. On August 11, 1492, Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI. He had bought the papacy. The people of Rome had mixed feelings. Some cheered. Some cheered. They were tired of Pope Innocent VIII, whom they saw as weak. Others, who understood the deals behind the vote, were horrified. The reformer Gerolamo Savonarola called the election invalid and said Alexander was chosen by simony, buying the office. Within a few years, Savonarola would be burned at the stake. People who crossed the Borgia Pope paid a high price. Alexander's early acts showed his real priorities. Within weeks, he made his teenage son Cesare cardinal. Church law said cardinals should be legitimate, celibate, and fit for the job. Cesare was 18, illegitimate, and more interested in war than religion. But he was a Borgia. That was enough for Alexander. Over time, Alexander raised at least 10 of his relatives to the College of Cardinals. He created many new Spanish cardinals, giving the Borgia clan great power in papal elections. The body that chose popes began to look like a family club. The nepotism was bold. One became Duke of Gandia and led the papal armies. Geoffrey, at 13, married a Neapolitan princess and became Prince of Squillace. Alexander used his daughter Lucrezia's marriages to make and break alliances. He also gave favors to the families of his mistresses. He made Alessandro Farnese, the brother of his current lover, a cardinal. That same Alessandro would later become Pope Paul III. The Borgia reach did not end with Alexander's death. Now to the mistresses. After he became Pope, an old man now, in his 60s, Alexander took a new lover, Julia Farnese. She was around 20, very beautiful, and married. Romans called her Julia la Bella, her Julia the Beautiful. The shocking part is not just the affair. It is where she lived. She stayed in the papal apartments inside the Vatican. How did the Pope make this work? He paid off her husband, Orsino Orsini. He gave him property and jobs. Foreign ambassadors wrote letters saying they saw Julia at papal events seated near the Pope. In 1494, she had a daughter named Laura. The official father was unknown, but most people assumed the Pope was the real father. The Roman diarist Stefano in Feshera wrote, "There is no longer any crime or shameful act that does not happen in the house of the pontiff." Even in Renaissance Rome, where many churchmen broke rules, people were shocked. Alexander did not seem to care. He did not distance himself from his 4 children with Vanosa. Instead, he brought them to the center of power. Cesare and Lucrezia became his key tools. This is where sex and politics turned deadly. The Borgias did not only break vows, they removed anyone who stood in their way. Look at Lucrezia's marriages. Her first marriage in 1493 was to Giovanni Sforza to tie the Borgias to Milan. She was 13. By 1497, the alliance was no longer useful. Alexander pushed for an annulment. The reason given was that Sforza was impotent and the marriage had not been consummated. Sforza was humiliated and angry. He accused Alexander of wanting the marriage ended, so the Pope could have Lucrezia for himself. He also claimed Cesare was sleeping with his sister. Most historians today think those were lies from a bitter man, but many at the time believed them easily. That shows how low the Pope's reputation had sunk. During the annulment process, rumors spread that Lucrezia was pregnant. In early 1498, a baby boy appeared in the Borgia household. People called him the Infans Romanus, the Roman infant. Alexander issued 2 papal bulls about the child. The public one said the boy was Cesare's son. A secret one, issued the same day, said the boy was Alexander's son. Why 2? Some historians think the child was Lucrezia's, fathered by a young man named Pedro Calderon. Soon after, Calderon's body was found in the Tiber. Many think Caesar had him killed. The double bulls may have been Alexander's way of protecting the child while hiding the truth. Suaucia's second marriage was to Alfonso of Aragon, Duke of Bassigli, in 1498. This tied the Borgias to Naples. Alfonso and Lucrezia seem to have cared for each other, and they had a son, but love did not matter. In 1500, Alexander and Cesare switched sides and backed France. Naples became a problem. On July 15, 1500, Alfonso was attacked on the steps of St. Peter's. He survived and was taken to the Vatican to heal, but on August 18 he was strangled in his bed. Cesare later bragged that he ordered the killing. The Pope's son murdered the Pope's son-in-law inside the Vatican. Alexander told Lucrezia to stop crying and arranged her next marriage. All this brings us back to October 30, 1501. The Banquet of the Chestnuts. This story comes from Johann Burchard's diary. Burchard was usually dry and exact. He wrote that Alexander hosted a dinner in the papal palace. There were Caesar, Lucrezia, and many churchmen and nobles. After dinner, 50 courtesans were brought in. They danced, first dressed, then naked. Candelabras were set on the floor, and chestnuts were thrown around them. The women crawled to pick up the chestnuts while the Pope and his guests watched. Then Burchard wrote, "The guests paired off with the courtesans and a contest began. The Pope gave prizes, fine clothes and jewelry, to the men who could complete the sexual act the most times." Yes, there's some modern scholars question parts of the story. They say some details may have been added by later copyists. Others say Burchard wrote what he saw. His diary is mostly calm and factual. If he wrote it, he believed it happened. And when you look at all we know about Alexander VI, the scene is not hard to imagine. Sex was only part of the rot. Alexander sold many things. He sold church offices, he sold pardons, he sold annulments and legal favors. One Venetian ambassador wrote, "The Pope sells everything for money, even justice. Want to be a cardinal? Oh, your illegitimate child recognized. Want your enemy punished? Make an offer." The Vatican began to look like a marketplace. Salvation itself seemed to have a price. Alexander used the money to fund Cesare's wars. From 1499 to 1503, Cesare conquered much of central Italy. He built a Borgia state. The wars were brutal. At Capua, when the city resisted, thousands were killed in a day. Alexander praised these victories as wins for the papacy. Everyone knew they also served the Borgia family. At the same time, the court's behavior shocked Europe. Courtesans were seen going in and out of the palace. Bankers like Agostino Chigi gave parties where naked women served food to cardinals. Ambassadors wrote home in disbelief. One French envoy said young women were admitted to the Pope's rooms at all hours. People joked that the Vatican was a brothel. Alexander did little to hide any of it. He also crushed his critics. Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, a fierce enemy, fled to France to avoid danger. Savonarola was executed. Old Roman families like the Orsini and the Colonna were attacked, their lands taken and given to Borgia allies. In 1497, the Borgias were struck from within. One, Alexander's favorite son, disappeared after a party. His body was found in the Tiber with many stab wounds. The Pope was broken with grief and talked for a short time about reform. But who killed one? Many suspected Cesare, driven by jealousy and ambition. The Pope may have suspected this too, but he did nothing. Within a year, Cesare gave up his cardinal's hat and took Juan's place as leader of the family's armies. Even fratricide could be used for power. By 1503, the Borgias looked unstoppable. Alexander was in his 70s but still strong. Cesare controlled central Italy. Lucrezia's marriage into the Este family linked the Borgias to Ferrara. It seemed the papacy was becoming a family throne and Cesare might someday rule both church politics and a Borgia state. Then, suddenly, everything changed. In August 1503, after a dinner at a villa, both Alexander and Cesare fell very ill. The Pope had fever and vomiting for days. On August 18, 1503, Alexander VI died. Rumors spread at once. They had been poisoned by wine meant for someone else. It sounded like justice, poisoners poisoned by their own trick. Most modern historians think Alexander died of malaria, which was common in Rome in summer. but the poison story fit the Borgia image so well that people believed it immediately. Cesare, still sick, could not hold his conquests. The next Pope, Julius II, was a sworn enemy of the Borgias. He tore down what they had built. Cesar fled and died in 1507 in Spain, in a small fight. Crucia in Ferrara gained a better name. She supported the arts and religion and died in 1519. She spent her later years trying to escape her family's dark shadow. Alexander's death shocked people in another way. When popes die, their bodies are usually shown to the people with honor. Reports said Alexander's body turned dark and swelled quickly. It smelled so bad that it was hard to put it in a coffin. Many Romans saw this as a sign of God's judgment. They said the devil had come for his own. Here is the hard truth about Alexander VI. He was not just a rare evil man. He was what happens when a holy office becomes only a tool for power. When the church stops being about faith and becomes about wealth and control. Many Renaissance popes were corrupt, but Alexander took it further. He showed that with enough money and force, you could buy and sell almost anything, even spiritual things. Martin Luther was a teenager when Alexander died. Later, the Borgia years became part of Luther's case against Rome. How could the church claim moral authority after such a pope? The Protestant Reformation, which split Western Christianity, grew in part as a reaction to the abuses Alexander represented. Even inside Catholicism, Alexander left a mark of shame that led to change. The Council of Trent, 1545-1563, reformed many things. It attacked simony, the buying of church offices, nepotism, giving jobs to family, and sexual misconduct. Rules were tightened. Celibacy was enforced more strongly. Selling offices was banned. The church tried to make sure there would never be another Alexander VI. Some say the danger almost became real. If Alexander had lived 10 more years, and if Cesare had been a little luckier, the Borgias might have turned the papacy into a family monarchy. Central Italy might have become a Borgia king. The Pope's spiritual power would have been a mask for one family's ambitions. What stopped it was not a miracle. It was age, disease, and death. The institution survived, but it kept the scars. The name of Borgia still brings up thoughts of poison, lays, and murder. In the Vatican, you can visit the Borgia apartments where Alexander lived. The walls, painted by Pinturicchio, are beautiful. For a long time after Alexander's death, popes avoided those rooms. Julius II refused to live there and had new rooms decorated by Raphael. It was easier to build new spaces than to forget the old memories. The Church's official view of Alexander VI is careful but clear. It does not deny his corruption, his mistresses, or his favoring of family. The Catholic Encyclopedia says he has sadly neglected the spiritual interests of the Church. That is a very soft way to say he was a disaster. Unlike some other controversial popes, Alexander has not been redeemed by history. He remains a warning. People sometimes say no pope ever took the name Alexander again because of him. In fact, later there were popes named Alexander V and Alexander VIII. But the name remains stained for many, and there has never been an Alexander IV. The shadow of Alexander VI is long. Why does his story matter today? Because it shows how power takes over step by step. Institutions are only as strong as the people who run them. With enough money, leverage, and fear, any system could be bent. People accept almost anything if it becomes normal slowly. First, a cardinal has a mistress. That shocks people, but they move on. Then he has children. That is worse, but some look away. Then he becomes pope and brings his children to court. Now people are worried, but what can they do? Then parties in the Vatican with courtesans. By then too many are silent or scared. This is how corruption grows. Not all at once, but little by little. Alexander VI did not start by hosting an obscene banquet in the Apostolic Palace. He climbed toward it over decades, always pushing the line, always seeing what he could get away with. By the time he was giving prizes at a sex contest inside the Vatican, the system was so weakened that almost no one could resist him. The story of Alexander VI forces us to face hard questions about power and human nature. If a pope surrounded by holy images, daily prayers and theology could fall so far, what does that say about the rest of it? It says that no office, no title, and no tradition can protect us from human weakness on their own. They need people of virtue, rules that are enforced, and communities willing to speak when something is wrong. Without that, even the holiest places can become stages for the worst acts.